All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another OWASP Toronto chapter meetup. My name is Adam Greenhill, and I'm with the OWASP crew, and will be your host for this evening. Just to give people some time to trickle into the event, we're having a bit of a pre-show banter with our special guest, Iris. So, Iris, how are you doing?
Good, and you?
Oh, doing great. And you have a very interesting background working for the, communication security establishment,
Yes.
one of the Canadian intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
So, how do you find working in an intelligence agency has helped you today in your career?
I have to say, working for an Intel agency, that was awesome. I would highly recommend everybody giving it a try. Maybe for just a few years. You probably don't want to spend your entire career there, depending on your interest and progression. But you get to see a lot of cool capabilities and systems, and also meet a lot of insanely, crazily intelligent people doing insane and crazy things. So it's a very special environment.
So, I'm sure all of that is super top secret. How much of that cool stuff can you implement just with open source tooling and know-how? Is it all proprietary stuff, or is some of that, anyone?
There are a lot of things that are developed in-house, but basically, well, like for example, if you do cyber, you will still be dealing with the same methodology,
Right.
and everybody does OSINT too. And if you're talking about analytical techniques like structure analysis, the kind of academics tend to do is the same everywhere. So there is a lot of common ground.
Okay. Interesting. Oh, sorry.
Right. I think the custom exploit dev or custom OSINT dev is very similar to some of the organizations who specialize in that as well.
Mhm.
Right? It just in general, you have to have some stuff in your back pocket in order to do something useful.
Yeah,
In
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, and even though the intelligence agencies have those the craziest technology and access that you can anything or you can think of, but in private sector, we still actually have a lot of advantage over the government environment as well. Because first of all, you don't have to deal with the bureaucracy.
That's very true. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
an understated value right there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, getting things done in the government, it's a very special environment.
They're a little less
You
nimble
have to be
for
patient.
regulatory
Yeah,
reasons.
regulatory compliance, legal. Like if you want to build something or even just purchase something off the shelf, it could take a few years before
Oh,
getting your hands on that kind of commercial tool. So
Yeah.
I mean, do you find that with regards to cybersecurity, has that changed over the years that you've been there, or is it still a very bureaucratic process? Because in the event that there is a huge ransomware attack or some new attack that you have to prepare for, that doesn't really lend well to bureaucracy. You know what I mean? You need action fast.
mhm. So in that case, I guess you would depend on different branches of the government. So if we are talking about defending against ransomware, that would probably fall under the defensive branch. So for example, CCCS in this particular case. And when I was talking about intelligence earlier, that kind of refers to the collection branch of the agency. So they have different mandates, and their response times will be very different. So I don't think people need to be worried about government not responding fast enough when you have an active ransomware attack against you.
I
Yeah.
think it's pretty understated, but I didn't know they had different branches for these things. So this is all going to be under the same umbrella, to be completely honest with you. So this is enlightening, perhaps, to note that maybe we'll be okay, with a ransomware attack. That's all I'll say.
They're different, but they're not that different. There's still an IT department, there's still an IR
Yeah.
department, those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you've worked in a lot of different kind of roles. What's your favorite one, Iris?
mm, wow, that's hard to say. I have to say because I'm really lucky in my career that I've always worked with great colleagues. So I can honestly say that every single team I've worked with, or they're all the best. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, I hear you.
Mhm.
Like it is super fortunate when you get that lucky and you're like everything is like a hit. So and then what's your like favorite role kind of thing? Even if it's like a small project, like what was your favorite thing to be doing?
My favorite thing is definitely building capability. So whether it's a program or you just need to build a system or get a tool working properly, you get this kind of rush when you see, things coming into fruition. Oh my God, I can actually see my progress and here's the result. That is a very good feeling, because in intelligence, a lot of time, it really is a game of patience, especially when it comes to investigation. You just have to wait. You cannot rush it. So sometimes it could take years before the investigation concludes. But when you are actually building a capability, that you get to see that, you can see that, the progress and the things you do, the build up, it really is exciting to see that.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm curious from like the capability standpoint. Would just be like for example, you need to collect data on someone's active social media pages or something like that. Like you need to scrape some data, and then you would build a tool to basically go out to all these pages, scrape all the data, and then you would take that in and analyze it. That would be like a collection event, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Okay,
Yes.
that's pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty cool. That seems pretty neat. I could also probably say that would be quite an interesting experience to build something like that.
Yeah.
Especially when it works. That's probably pretty understated as well, I would say. Yes.
Definitely. Like hoarding data is very exciting. It's just making sense of the data. the part that comes afterwards, that is the tricky part.
Oh yeah, I could. Not for me, for sure.
So we talked about what was your favorite thing. So what would be the hardest thing you've had to do in intelligence?
The waiting. Always the waiting. It's like dealing with bureaucracy, trying to get things approved, or sometimes you just wait for your target or your enemy to make a mistake, and that could take months, years, however long it takes. And so you have to have a lot of patience if you want to do intelligence.
There's definite theme going on here with patience. That.
Yeah.
An important quality.
Yeah.
Patience and empathy, I think, are big things in security in general, right? So.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially with all that data, right?
It's nice though. You get to work with like some really interesting data geeks who are just like all over that kind of thing, and the kinds of data that they pull out, like the kinds of insight they can pull out of data and combining it together is really interesting. Like
yes,
having data scientists.
Yeah. Because data, the intelligence is essentially making sense of data. So it's the making sense part that's the most critical step in the whole collection and also analysis cycle. And that is hard work. It takes a lot of very smart people and a lot of hard work to achieve that goal.
Yeah, I was reading this book about the NSA, just now even, and they were saying that they collect like 4 petabytes of data, like I think a year or something like that. Like it's just astronomical, the amount of data. Like 4 petabytes is like basically all the books ever written, just ever, right? Every year, that's the amount of data they collect. So to try to analyze that, I couldn't imagine the processes in place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the odd things about like big data, though. I find like people were like, we should collect all the data, and then most of the intelligence people and the data engineers are like, no, you got to collect very specific data that makes a lot of sense to come up with certain like things. You have to have a kind of like a hypothesis, or you're just going to collect all this data and then it's going to be like trying to wade through the ocean. Like it's just too much stuff.
Yeah,
right? So
you have to be very specific and actually setting a goal when you are collecting information, and that's why we're going to talk about this later in this presentation as well. It's just that you have to have a goal, a direction, or some kind of requirements. You can just go out and collect everything under the sun, because you're gonna run out of storage in probably a day or two.
Yeah. And then you just don't know where to how to the stuff is in the wrong format to make sense of it until you do different kind of data transformation, and then that's another like 10,000 petabytes of storage by itself, and a whole data transformation exercise to correlate.
Exactly.
Always like super interested in the people who are like, we should collect all the things. I'm like, no. Go talk to these other people. You collect these 5 things, but collect them across like these 5 different areas.
Exactly. Collecting data, it's a very labor intensive and also very, very expensive. Not even the NSA, the CIA can afford that. So you always need a direction first before you go and actually do operations.
Yeah, I agree.
Wow.
Great. Any like last banter things, because we should probably do housekeeping and then let Iris actually give her talk.
Yeah, very interesting though.
Thank you.
Yeah, but any last words?
Thanks for
Opening
coming.
words.
All right.
No.
There's more time for questions at the end of the talk, and I'm sure Iris would love to have these talks then as well. But before we begin the talk, a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions or comments, please leave that in the chat, and we'll be asking it to Iris at the end of her presentation. If you're looking for CPE credits or you have feedback for us, there's a link in the description of this video, so feel free to use that. If you're looking for work or you're hiring, also communicate that in the chat now as well. And last but not least, Sector. Sector is coming this year. It will be both live and in person. There's talks, networking events, lots of fun stuff. And we have a discount code for you. OWASP 2022 will get you $100 off or a free expo pass. And we, OWASP, will have a booth there. And you can see us live in person. So all right, Iris.
Hoping that we'll have some interesting swag to bring as well. So if you want to come play with cornucopia cards, I think we have a couple of decks left as well. So, anyway,
there you go. Yeah, should be good. Iris, are you good to go?
Okay. Yes. Let me share my screen.
Yep.
All right, let's move that.
Okay. Yeah, we can see your slide deck. Do you want to switch? Yeah, perfect. All right. So the rest of us are going to go backstage. We'll be listening in, and then we'll help with questions at the end. But let's hand it over to Iris. Please welcome Iris.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I am Iris Wang. I started my intelligence career about 16 years ago as a SIGINT analyst at CSE. I picked up cyber while working there, and after I joined the private sector, I started doing threat intel full-time. I have worked on pretty much all aspects of intelligence, direct functions like collection, analysis, reporting, but also policy, op planning, audit and compliance, client relation, vendor management, budget, tooling, and a bunch of other stuff. I have also done intelligence in different ecosystems. So from government to consulting to bank to startup, and actually right now I'm freelancing. Intelligence is a beast, and I can only claim expertise in a couple of very specific areas. But after spending this many years breathing intel day in and day out, I have a lot of thoughts on all kinds of intelligence topics, and I can speak for days. But we have 40 minutes today, so I will spare you all the brain dump. There are a lot of step-by-step guides on how to set up a threat intelligence program. And if you can spare 10 grand, SANS offers a complete course on the subject, 4, 5, 7, 8, I believe. It is a very structured approach to the threat intelligence. For people without any intel background, I recommend either the reference material or the SANS course as a starting point. But you can find all this information online, so why are we here? Well, don't worry about it. In this session, I am going to talk about things you likely won't find in a book or in an online article. We are going to focus on issues that make or break a threat intelligence program, but are only known to people who have spent some time in the trenches. So if you're setting up an intelligence program, this talk will complement whatever reference materials you're using and help you plan better. If you're running an intelligence program, the talk may help you optimize your program further by bringing issues to your attention. If you're just curious about a threat intel, you can check out some online reference articles afterwards and compare them to the talking points of this presentation and see which one makes sense and which one doesn't. We're going to cover a lot of topics today, so I'm going to run through the entire presentation in one go and save the discussion and Q&A afterwards. So now let's begin. Well, actually, I lied. Before I dive into the details, we need to pause and consider how is an intelligence program created. In my experience, it usually starts like this. First, a VIP decides that he, she, they needs intel for whatever reason. It could be triggered by an immediate need, like an ongoing incident, or it could be because every other company on the same block already has an intel program. It could be anything. Then the VIP usually does one of the following. They get a super expensive all-in-one threat intelligence platform if they prefer to keep things in-house. Or they get a super expensive all-in-one service provider if they prefer to outsource the function. If they can't afford either, they tend to buy a bunch of tools and subscriptions that may or may not work together. Or if they're extra cautious, they can set up an intel team that may or may not include actual intel personnel and let the team iron out everything. The result of such programs, it's usually a mixed bag. So actually, not all of them end up in disasters. Some become functional, but only after you throw a lot of efforts and resources into them. It will be a lot cheaper and easier if you just set it up right from the start. And there is a correct way to set it up. Intelligence disciplines and programs vary a lot, and every organization, department, or team is different. But they always have to follow the intel cycle. You might have seen this diagram or a variation of it before. So sometimes they have more steps, sometimes they have less steps. But the basic principles are the same. First, you need to set a goal for your program. And you do so by gathering client requirements. Then you create a plan to meet the requirements and then execute a plan to produce intel. After the intel is delivered to clients, you use your feedback to modify the requirements and to further fine-tune the production effort, and then rinse and repeat. In this presentation, I will follow the intel cycle and run through the program, the issues in that order. So now we can really get started. First is the requirements. If you can fix one thing only in your intelligence program, it has to be getting the requirements right. Intel requirements are like your final destination when you're planning a trip. If you enter the wrong address, nothing else matters. You are screwed. All the meticulous planning and the time spent on the road won't get you where or you want or need to be. And how do we know that we have the right requirements? First and foremost, they must be related to your mission or mandate. Like if you're a local law enforcement, monitoring illegal drug trade on the dark web could be tied back to your mandate. Hacking a foreign government to steal their nuclear warhead blueprints? Probably not. Next, consider who should be involved in the program, both as an intel provider and also as a consumer/client. Cyber doesn't exist in a vacuum. In threat intel, our default collaborators are other security teams or the IT department. And your default clients are probably the executives. But intel goes beyond these people. How about the lawyers who have to be coding whenever there's an incident? The social media and customer service teams, the first ones to hear about suspicious activities from the client. Or government and law enforcement liaison people who have access to information you aren't even aware of. These are just the internal ones too. So in more mature organizations like the government, you also have to deal with external entities as collaborators and partners. They need to be included in the requirement gathering phase too. The other thing to think about is if these requirements are valid and relevant to your goal, and if they allow you to produce actionable intel. For example, I spoke to a small Ontario business recently and asked about their biggest concern when it comes to cyber threat. Their answer? Government surveillance. Oops. Sorry. So even without doing a full threat and risk assessment, you probably are gonna find this answer kind of weird. Because, why would the government do that to a small business in Canada? Or what actions can you take if the government really is going after you? So this requirement, gathering information on Canadian government surveillance activities against business, the requirement itself is not valid, not relevant, and also there's no action that can be taken. It's not a good requirement, but it is a good example of people coming up with requirements, not with objective assessments, but from personal experiences and whatever they see in the news and social media. So be cautious of that when you are reviewing the requirements. And we are still not done with talking to clients. One thing people keep forgetting is that the clients are not the intel experts. You are. When you gather client requirements, focus on their goals, specifically what they're trying to achieve instead of what they want you to do. Too often, the clients will request something very specific, like, I want the source code of this malware, when they should be telling you what they want to do with the source code, and that you, the expert, figure out the details. I once worked on a security review. The client asked me to find evidence of an entity hacking Canadian companies. It was very specific, and I tried and tried, but just couldn't find anything. The client was super insistent, so I finally asked them, what are you trying to do with the information? And they told me, oh, we just need evidence of wrongdoing so we can reject the deal. So I told them, well, I couldn't find any evidence of them hacking Canadian companies, but they are hacking American companies, and here's the evidence. Had we stuck with the original flawed requirement, I would never be able to help them achieve their ultimate goal. Once you have a list of requirements, you will need to prioritize them based on risk assessment. I'm not going to go into the details here. There are a lot of formulas, algorithms, and metrics for assessing risks. Just pick one that suits your use case, run your requirements against it, and then prioritize accordingly. Another thing that people often forget is that your security program needs to reach a certain level of maturity in order to action on the threat intel you collected. If you spend $3 million to buy a threat intel platform, but you don't have a SIEM or a SOAR to ingest the output, that's turning your threat intel platform into a $3 million storage unit. In addition, knowing you have a lot of threats and risks, but not doing anything about them will make you look pretty bad in front of auditors and regulatory bodies. So after you start collecting intel, you have to action on them. Even if it's something like, oh, we can utilize the intel right now, but we are building up the capabilities, so here's the plan. So keep that in mind when you're considering setting up an intel program. Finally, after you have a list of prioritized intel requirements, also known as PIR, make sure the list is codified and authorized by appropriate personnel, because you will have clients tasking you some really random stuff just to satisfy their curiosity. In those cases, you can refer back to your PIR list and then accept or reject the request based on that. And of course, the PIRs have to be reviewed regularly to make sure you are producing relevant intel. Like, remember how anonymous was the biggest threat to corporation several years ago? Do you still think they are a threat today? But if your requirements haven't been updated since 2015, you probably are still collecting on them, and it's time to move on. This is an example of what a PRI list looks like. The example comes from a threat intel vendor called Intel 471. And this is just a simple example to show you what it looks like. It may or may not be the best example for your particular use case, but just for a taste. And now that we have Intel requirements and got most of the stakeholders involved, it's time for the most laborious phase of the cycle, planning. Because Intel never works in silo, the first thing you need to consider is what other frameworks I have to work with. In threat intel, kill chain is probably the first thing you need to consider when setting up an Intel program. If you can integrate your Intel collection, analysis, and reporting with your kill chain setup, it does wonders for automations and metrics production later. MITRE ATT&CK is another one. If possible, map that to your requirements too. And then after including the kill chain, you should probably think about other frameworks your clients and collaborators use, and if it makes sense to integrate with them as well. So for example, OODA decision loop is quite popular with the military and also has lots of supporters in the private sector, especially amongst the VIPs. Or if your organization wants a SOC 2 certification, then your threat intel program needs to fit into that as well. So if you know your clients are using certain framework, check it out in the planning phase. Trying to make things fit together after they are set in stone is always very, very painful. And then next, make sure your legal and compliance departments are involved in the planning. If you don't have anybody in-house, it's better to find an external counsel specializing in this area and ask for their opinions on your proposed setup. If you want your analysts to go onto the dark web on their work laptops and buy data with company money, you have to clear it with your lawyers first. And before you start building and actually getting your hands dirty, do an inventory of your existing capabilities. And I do mean every capability: software, hardware, app, tools, subscription, access, relationship, people, anything tangible and intangible. It sounds straightforward, but it's actually pretty daunting when you are working within a big organization. These capabilities can show up at the most unexpected places. It actually has happened to me quite a few times. Like, I was interested in a new threat intel subscription or tool. I reached out to the vendor, and then they came back to me and gave me the contact information of another team who already owned a subscription or tool. So you always need to check what's in the closet before going on a shopping spree. It would also be a good time to do some deconfliction. So sometimes you have other teams already performing the functions you want to include in your new program. So in such case, you will have to figure out how to divide up the duties or do some reorganizations. Duplication of efforts happen too often and wastes too much money and should be avoided at all costs. A big problem in private sector is that people conflate in Intel function with the execution and decision making. Intel is an advisory function and should be completely independent. Things are murkier in threat intelligence specifically because there is a lot of automation and integration going on. But the rule of thumb is don't do other teams' job for them. Like, a lot of us probably have run into the situation where you send vulnerability or cyber campaign information related to a specific asset to the owner of the asset. And then they came back to you and asked you to tell them how to patch or safeguard their system, even though they should be the experts. There is a good reason all experts say Intel should remain independent and impartial. If you let Intel people get involved in decision-making or the execution of the decision, that makes them the judge, jury, and executioner all in one. So let's say I am the Intel team lead, and I really want a MacBook Air for work, and I'm also involved in the purchasing decision. I can easily produce Intel to justify that why MacBook Air is the most secure device ever, and then get that for my entire team. You don't want that. There are many different types of intelligence for different use cases, and obviously no intelligence shop can cover everything. You need to prioritize aggressively during the program build-up. While every circumstance is different, I usually recommend starting with the technical information such as IOCs, logs, or feeds. They are easy to understand and quantify, and they can give you the initial quick win to get more supporters and patrons. But keep in mind that such technical data is the lowest form of intel and has the least value. They are good stepping stones, but they cannot be the end-all, be-all of your Intel program. You have to build something else on top of that. Now, resource and talent management. They require special consideration when you are building an Intel program. Most organizations treat it like a hiring for IT, but it is quite different. Anyone who's hired for threat intel will tell you there are certain skill sets and experiences that can only come from government or military. You can imagine how hard it is to compete for these talents on the market. When you are staffing an Intel program, make a list of the skill sets required. Identify what can and cannot be trained and then recruit accordingly. Because it is impossible to hire all the talents to deliver on all your requirements, one alternative is to form alliances with external parties. There's the industry-specific ISAP model where every member contributes to a pool of resources. Or you can find selected partners like the Five Eyes, where members divided up the efforts and work on projects and goals jointly. And that brings us to the very last point in this section. Recognize your strengths and weaknesses. Play up your strengths and find someone else to cover your weaknesses. If you have Russian-speaking analysts with good access to Russian dark web forums, but you really need intel on Iranian state-sponsored cyber campaigns, do you go hire Farsi analysts and start scanning Farsi Telegram channels? No. You either find a vendor who provides that information, or better yet, find a partner who has good Iran program and then trade intel with them. That's why you need good branding. If people know you are really good at something, they will trade with you. Intel partnership is always about quid pro quo. This is a very high-level look of what planning an Intel program looks like from the Joint Chiefs of Staff manual. Obviously, there are so many issues and details in the planning stage that I cannot cover in this session. For this phase specifically, I highly recommend hiring someone who's got experience in setting up Intel programs to do it for you. It'll save you a lot of headaches down the road. And then collection. The collection phase of the Intel cycle, sometimes also known as the Intelligence Collection Plan or ICP. It is probably the least understood part. People who have never done Intel collection have a hard time imagining how much efforts, resources, and time go into this phase. In my SIGINT career, I was well known for a specific investigation in which I provided extremely important intelligence to the cabinet with a 2-day notice. Now, the analysis and reporting part was 2 days, but it actually took me 3 years to collect the data, and build a database from which the intel was created. Can you imagine anywhere outside of the government or military where they let you collect for 3 years without producing tangible results? If hearing collecting for 3 years without results make you iffy, you are not alone. A lot of threat intel practitioners, sometimes me included, fall into the mental trap of being addicted to actions. In previous slide, I talked about how intelligence must be actionable, but that's for the client. For intel producers, actions usually mean finding and processing data. If we're not doing that, it feels like we're not doing our jobs. But keep in mind, they are valuable and useless data, and valuable data is hard to come by. And that's the reason people start chasing low-value data like IOCs and producing low-value intelligence to keep ourselves busy. Would the time and energy be better spent on figuring out how to get more valuable data? Of course. So don't be fooled by the false excitement induced by futile efforts. The next point is you need to have a good plan, actually a good schema for data collection, processing, and storage. As you accumulate more data, things get really messy really quick. It goes beyond just sticks and taxi. You need to consider data and report types, labeling, indexing, searching, import-export, cross-platform functionality, integration, and governance. If you can have a centralized portal or platform, it's highly recommended, although it is still not enough. So always set aside money in your budget for further integration, more integrations down the road. And of course, you have to automate. Automation makes the whole process so much faster and easier. My only advice is to do it as much as possible. OPSEC. There is absolutely no need to go full NSA, but it is still a valid concern. Like, are you worried about people knowing you're collecting certain data? Do you think you would run into legal and compliance problem with your collection plan? Is collecting something gonna jeopardize the personal safety of your analysts? Think everything through and consult with a few experts in this area before you do anything. Those of us who have worked with technical threat intelligence feeds have all dealt with the dreaded false positives and know how important it is to verify data. But even when something is supposedly verified by credible partners and sources, you still need to verify again. So I've been tracking a threat actor for about a year. This guy just popped up in a top-tier cybercrime forum and became an elite member very quickly and started leaking supposedly data stolen from governments. Every single threat intel vendor, and I mean every single one, has reported him as a new VIP in a data breach area. So does this sound like a dangerous new player that we need to monitor? The thing is, if you look closely, he bought his elite member status on that forum. And everything he's leaked is auto-generated fake data. I personally verified all his samples. They are all fake. But all these credible vendors just reported his claims verbatim. So always verify your data, no matter what the source is. Even the FBI has put up some pretty questionable things in their flash reports. Now, analysis. It's actually the easiest one when you're planning a program because most people have an innate sense of how to do analysis, but there are still a few points that we need to consider. The biggest problem in analysis is that you don't know what you don't know. If you keep your analysts very compartmentalized and isolated and segregated, they wouldn't know what's missing and therefore produce flawed analysis. Then the error gets perpetuated and propagated as the product moves up the decision chain and also when it gets incorporated into other products. It is much easier to remove any bias, knowledge gap, or analytical error at a working level. So create a way to facilitate analytical exchange, and I promise you, you will see a huge improvement in the product quality. Even in a highly technical field like threat intelligence, there are still a lot of individual judgment calls. A risk expert once told me that despite all the metrics and formulas, risk assessment is essentially like this. To be honest, intel analysis is pretty similar. They are scientific guesses. So we need a robust review process to make sure the scientific guesses are truly scientific and not just wild guesses. Usually, you will want at least 2 rounds of review, 1 peer review and 1 managerial review. The higher the stake, the more review cycles you need. But despite what I just said, we still need to analyze in a way that's repeatable and easily understood by a third party. It is like a scientific review standard. Every single step is listed and attributed so readers can follow along and reproduce the results on their own. In intel analysis, repeatable results aren't always possible. But if you do things right and be transparent with your analytical process, at least people can see where you're coming from and understand the reasoning behind your conclusion. Produce intel like you'll have to defend it in court at some point in the future. So you've produced a wonderful intel product that will change the world. Now what? Call the press and let everybody know about it? Surprisingly, most people's first inclination is to lock it in a drawer and throw away the key. In my experience, over-compartmentalization is a bigger problem than oversharing, and valuable intel sometimes doesn't make its way to relevant stakeholders. To make a process easier, create dissemination guidelines for each PIR beforehand so people don't have to make the decision on their own. If there are predetermined distribution lists, it will make sharing a lot easier. Alternatively, you can also sanitize your products by removing sensitive information or anonymizing the data. These measures make the products less useful, so proceed with caution. But remember, there are 3 rules for sanitizing intel. Do not reveal your source, do not reveal your tradecraft, and do not reveal your target. Follow them and you'll instinctively know how to share intel without jeopardizing your operations or getting into trouble with legal. Okay, and when distributing your products, how the intel is consumed is the most important. Sometimes it's basically a personal preference of different format, like written reports versus oral briefings. Within reason, it's always best to disseminate products in a format based on client's preference so they can get the most out of the intel. Other times is technical consideration. If you want to share Yara rules with an internal client, you should ensure it's something they can use directly. If you want to share a multi-go, I2, or Palantir project, so not just a graph, check if your clients have compatible tools first. A big issue in disseminating intel products is the lack of robust tracking mechanism. Most of the time, people are reluctant to share because they can't be sure how their products will be further distributed. And it is a tough issue. Even the most expensive platforms are often deficient in this area because people only onboard intel producer and not clients onto the platform. Therefore, you need a separate procedure to track and safeguard the products. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, even an Excel spreadsheet will do. But when your shop gets really large and you have a lot of clients from different departments, you may need a dedicated client relation team to handle this. Ultimately, the goal of producing intel is to help people make better decisions. The more people utilizing your intel, the better the world becomes. And to make that happen, you need to actively market and promote your intel products. Find opportunities to socialize your products, and also find supporters and patrons to vouch and promote for you. You can reach very high places if VIPs swear by your products. And sometimes create healthy competition among your clients also help. Just make sure your clients know that your products are good, are popular, and your shop is in demand. So now you've created a good product and sent it to the right client. It's not a time for the next project yet. It's time to get some feedbacks, which in most cases is like pulling teeth from people. Running an intelligence program is hard work, and usually it takes multiple iterations to get things right. So you really need client feedback to improve your program. There are many ways to get feedback. Pick any that suit you as long as you get your answers. But the most important question that you always have to ask is it actionable? If a client tells you that the intelligence is actionable, like they changed a procedure based on your intel, save a copy for performance review or budget request later because it's wonderful news. If the client didn't action on the intel, you should ask further questions. Did the intel completely miss the mark? Was the quality too bad to be useful? How can you make it better next time? And sometimes you get surprising or weird answers like, we can take actions because we're actually not involved in this area, but the information is super interesting, so keep it coming. In such cases, depending on the sensitivity of the intel, you may want to review your product distribution list because it means it probably was sent to the wrong people. Soliciting feedback from clients is also a great education opportunity. Anyone who's involved in intel for some time will tell you clients often have unrealistic expectations because they simply don't understand how intel program works. So you have to educate them. However, the process needs to be repeated periodically because people change jobs and you will get a revolving door of clients. So be prepared for continuous engagement and education. As important as client feedbacks are, your feedback is also important. Threat intel has the advantage of lots of automation and direct integration into the security apparatus. That means you can create metrics and produce feedbacks to see how well some of your intelligence performs. Does your intel make security controls do better over time? How many attacks are blocked at various stages of the kill chain because of your intel? VIPs love to see those, and producing these feedbacks on your own will show them how important your program is. In addition, you also need to give feedback to everybody involved in the production process. Your own team, other teams who work on the project, vendors who provided support, the list goes on. Let them know what worked and what didn't work so everybody knows what to expect the next time and everybody can do better. So this is the end of the presentation. We have covered a lot of ground today, and it's time to go back to the basics. Whenever you encounter issues with your intel program or you're just lost, remind yourself intel is teamwork. They are experts and colleagues who can and are very willing to help. And there is strength in number, finding partners inside and outside of your organization so we can face the challenge together. And that's what I did with this presentation as well. I conducted interviews to prepare for this talk. What you just heard was the combined effort of multiple intelligence experts in different fields. So thanks to OWASP for giving me this opportunity to share it with you. I really love Intel and I'm always happy to chat. If you have any questions and comments, please let me know. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you for that, Iris. That was amazing.
Thank
It was
you.
great. Intel is very complex. That's what I've learned.
It is.
Absolutely. I think we were talking before we started the live stream about like how lots of people do threat intel and do intelligence gathering, but they just don't really think about it because they're always thinking about the huge intel programs. You want to expand a little bit on that while people think in the audience think about like what other questions or comments they might want to make?
Of course. So when people think about intelligence program, they tend to go straight to the most complicated and advanced and mature programs. They think about NSA, they think about CIA, they think about these super world elites doing crazy things and extreme like technical supercomputer and quantum computing, all kinds of crazy things. But in reality, Intel is making sense of information you collected. Even things like gathering open source information from Twitter, checking the news every single day, that is intelligence. That is intelligence. That is intel collection. So I would say if you can afford to set up a proper threat intelligence program, you can still set up a really good capability simply by going to trusted sources on Twitter, on your other news feed, or any other channel you have access to. Gather this information and then organize them, see if any of them could be of use to your organization. That is intel, and that is what anyone can do.
Thanks. We have a question from an audience member as well. They say, thank you for the presentation. What intel cert would you recommend other than SAN?
This one is a little difficult because there are at first there was only the SANs, but now there are different intel certs in different areas. Like just recently, I started seeing people giving an OSINT cert, so certification specifically for OSINT. But in reality, it is very hard to evaluate somebody's capability based on certs alone, because you do intel by actually doing it, not by studying it in the classroom.
I think that's generally true of security and
yeah.
I guess to piggyback off that too, how does one go from it seems like intelligence and that's a very complex thing. So how does someone get even into it? Like, is there like school programs? Is it just going through certs? Should they go to normal like cybersecurity programs first and then branch into it? Like, what's a avenue for someone who's interested in this kind of work?
If we're talking about traditional intel, like HUMINT, SIGINT, and like foreign relations analysis and strategic planning and things like military, things like that, joining the government or the military is the most direct route, and there are school programs designed specifically for these. Mm-hmm. For threat intel, the routes are more varied. And usually people would start, there are two routes. Basically, you could go the technical route. So you start as working in the security field, and then you transition into threat intelligence.
I see.
Or you go through the traditional intel route. You do SIGINT, you do HUMINT, and then you transition into threat intel.
Okay, so there's a few ways, basically, is what we're learning here. Yeah. There's a few ways to get there. Okay, good to know.
There's actually, if you're in Toronto, there's a ton of threat intel shops and also like security research shops. So a lot of them start out in a lot of people start out in security research and then they move into more threat intel because they start out with malware analysis or they start out with similar things and then they go to more attribution and other. So lots of potential to join those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I would say OSINT is a very good starting point because it's easy, it's accessible, everybody can do it, and there are a lot of resources and help online. And there are a lot of really nice, knowledgeable, and helpful experts in OSINT area as well. So you can start with OSINT, and then once you get a feel of it, you can transition into threat intelligence and moving into the cyber area.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of things, and I forget what they're called. Maybe Iris, you would know, but there's some events in Toronto where they're when it uh
The OSINT
where
ETF.
It
yeah
was, yeah.
where they get together, like
Is it by
where
the DC4 and 6?
yeah, the DC 416 guys actually put together something where they collaborate with the Toronto Police and other like police to go through and do OSINT events for to try to find missing people, I think it is.
Mhm.
So that's a
Yes.
nice place to like start if you're ever interested in like going into it. I forget what it's called.
Yeah, and they
Trace
are
Lab.
Trace
That's the
Lab
one. Thank
Search
you.
Party, I think.
That's
Yeah,
the one.
I linked it in chat. Yeah, they have them around Toronto, and it's a great initiative. It's for all skill sets as well. You don't have to be like used to it or knowledgeable of OSINT to do it. Anyone can come. They teach you how to do OSINT. It's great.
Yeah.
There are also a lot of OSINT online CTF that you can join and participate in. There are a lot of them, like on Discord, on Twitter, everywhere.
Do you have like a recommended like Discord or Twitter to that people should maybe look at as sort of an entry point?
Oh wow,
Or
I have a huge
Oh.
list, so maybe I will share that after this talk.
yeah, that would be awesome actually. Like maybe stuff for we usually like categorize by for beginners, people who are just starting, and then people who are like already in it or like starting programs and they want to join a group that's kind of like doing it, right?
Mhm.
So I think that would be useful. There are a couple of other questions. There is one from Jessica who asks, how does Intel collection differ from data collection for simple data science projects?
Well, we were actually talking about this before the actual presentation. With Intel collection, you have to have a goal in mind. So you start with a goal and then you collect specifically to achieve that goal instead of just gathering a bunch of random data and to see what makes sense. I think that's more like a data science approach versus the Intel approach. Because with Intel doesn't exist in vacuum. It always serves a purpose. So you always have to keep that purpose in mind when you are collecting, and just discard everything that's irrelevant to whatever you're trying to achieve.
Hopefully that answered your question. And if not, then please follow up with comments. There is another question that what's your favorite link analysis tools? Or are there any that are open source?
I am very, very old school. So my favorite is I2 Analyst Notebook. It's extremely popular amongst the government and military and law enforcement circle, but it's not open source and it's quite expensive. Not Palantir expensive, but still expensive. For open source, I would recommend Multigo. I mean, you still have to pay for some of the transforms and additional functions, but even their free functionality is pretty good if you're just getting into it and just want to get a feel of it.
And Multigo has sales too for like their membership. So if you keep your eye out, you can get like you can get annual memberships for like $5-10, right? If you hit it at the right time. So I always look out for that and buy when it's cheap.
Yes.
We were mentioning before Trace Lab, so the search party. And then the next question is threat hunting a component of doing threat intelligence? And is there a difference between the two?
Threat hunting is totally part of intelligence. So this would be part, I would say this will fall into the collection phase of the Intel cycle, because you are collecting information on an adversary. And it could also be, it also goes into the analysis phase, because once you identify a threat or some kind of suspicious activity, you have to do some analysis and maybe hypothesis testing to see if your original assumption is true or false.
I'd say in an organization, when people talk about threat hunting as like an organization, they're usually talking about using like threat intel and or providing threat intel via like the activity of doing threat hunting. So there's usually like a team that's different from the threat intel team that work together to act like you do something useful with the threat intel or supplement threat intel by poking around with humans looking for other signs of intrusion.
Yeah, it goes both ways. So you can start with the threat intel team. Threat intel team sees some new campaign or TTPs, and then they give that information to the threat hunting team so they can look into the environment to see if there's anything suspicious. Or it could be the other way. The threat hunters see something weird in their environment, pass that information to the threat intel team, and ask the threat intel team to investigate further and gather more information on the anomaly they're seeing. So this goes back to the collaboration part I was talking about earlier. Just you have to have analytical exchange, talk to different teams, whether it's within your organization or someone outside. Well, obviously, if you're sharing with other people, make sure they have the proper clearance. But analytical exchange is so important when you are sharing information.
Yeah, in my head, and Iris, you're the expert, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like you can't do threat hunting without some sort of threat intel because it doesn't make any sense. You'll have nothing. You'll be poking around in the dark, right?
No, so it actually relates back to what Jessica was asking earlier.
Mhm.
When you're collecting information, if you're actually doing intel collection, you have to start with a goal in mind. So that will be threat hunting. You suspect there's something bad, and then you have a reference point or a starting point, and you go from there. Instead of just going through logs and inspecting things at random, and hopefully something will pop up.
And I think the whole part of the point of Iris's presentation is that if you have threat intelligence without actually then doing something meaningful with it, of which threat hunting can be one of those meaningful like uses, then you're doing it wrong because you're doing threat intelligence for the sake of saying you do threat intelligence.
Data hoarding, unfortunately, is very common in not just threat intel, but every single intelligence discipline, and
Absolutely.
It's very wasteful.
So Iris, earlier we talked about certification and also how does one get into threat intel. I guess on the flip side, if you were to hire a threat intel analyst, what kind of skill sets or capabilities or aptitudes you would be looking for?
So there are different positions for threat intel, and I talk about the skill set that can be trained and cannot be trained. So it doesn't matter which position. I would say the most important skill set is actually communications, good communication skills, because in threat intel sometimes it doesn't matter what you're doing when it comes to intelligence. Whether you are writing strategic report and briefing the VIPs, or if you are reviewing logs and hunting for threats in your environment, the most important part is you have to be able to communicate what you learned to other people so they understand the threat and do something about it. Therefore, communication skill is the number one most important thing. Like, for example, even if you are on the technical track, you are a threat hunter, you are malware analyst or doing a forensic analyst, then you don't have to actually write a detailed strategic report and doing prediction and crazy analysis. You still need to be able to convey your findings, translate the technical, all kinds of technical jargons to everyday language, so other people can understand it.
If we go to universities and you tell people, yeah, that report writing never going away. that whole like presentation thing, totally something you're gonna need to do more of in your career, and they're just like,
communication skill. If you can write, if you can speak, then you can go very, very far.
It's true. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Yukvei. Did you have a follow-up?
No. Okay.
There is a follow-up question from chat. How do you keep track and where do you document actors and any information related to them for correlation?
There are many different ways, but the most important thing is it has to be centralized. So you shouldn't, it could be as basic as one Excel spreadsheet, like name of the actor, where they're seeing, their chronological events and some links to reference materials, or you can get Palantir and just store everything at a platform. As long as you have a centralized place to store the information and it's easily retrievable and searchable. So it doesn't matter if it's Excel or Palantir. It really depends on your budget.
Are there any like free open source tools that you would recommend in if you cannot afford Palantir or Splunk, like the Elk Stack or anything like that?
It depends on your purpose.
I guess for like the collection and analyzation of the data.
Pretty sure Notepad comes with every computer, right?
Yep, that works too.
Yeah.
If you want to go to if you want to go that route, yes, Notepad will work. Excel spreadsheet, Word documents, if you really want to keep it low tech. Otherwise, the tools, the platforms we mentioned earlier, Multigo, and you can also play with other things like Neo4j if you actually want to program something.
There's a heck of a lot of people who are moving to Jupyter Notebooks for very specific uses.
Very interesting.
Jupyter.
I guess Notion might also be a pretty reasonable one if you want to keep low tech, but I don't know.
There are many tools and options. So the most important thing really is the budget.
The budget, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Just where the whole it's expensive part comes into play here, I think, right?
Yeah.
The tooling. Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
There's a comment from the audience about Sans SOF Elk being open source.
I don't know what that is. I'm gonna Google it right now.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there's also a Helk as well. It's more like threat hunting specifically, but it's like open source, like threat hunting platform that leverages the Elk stack.
Oh, that's cool. I'll post a link here in case anyone else will look at it. But yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. I didn't know that existed. Good to know.
There's so many tools. The new tools are coming out every single day.
Yeah, no kidding. Are there any like other ones that you would kind of like unofficially mention to people, like understanding that you're not supporting any specific vendors or whatever, but like your favorites or things that you use fairly often that you reach for as part of your arsenal?
For me personally, Excel spreadsheet. It's free. It's available.
Yeah, true. Or at least most of us have it on our work laptops.
Yep.
That's true. Yeah.
Excel's a weird one. It really is like when you first start, you're like, oh, I guess it's pretty good. And then halfway through your career, you're like, this sucks. I hate Excel. And then at the end of your career, you're like, Excel's amazing. It's literally the best tool ever made. It's Turing complete too. So I think that speaks to how good quality it is. So it's PowerPoint though. So I mean,
yeah,
maybe Microsoft's onto something. That's what I would say.
Yeah, you after trying out so many tools and different platforms and systems, really the most basic ones are the easiest to use.
So let's say if you were to just use Excel, Iris, is there a specific way you recommend how to structure your data and how to what kind of user?
It depends on use case. Like, are you tracking threat actor? Are you tracking TTP, different techniques, events, campaigns, and things? So just organize it however you see fit. As long as it's easily searchable to you, and it works according to your logic, then it's all good.
Is there like a framework you might recommend that people kind of go to who are just starting out?
Or a template?
Or a template that you could kind of point people to?
For Excel spreadsheet
or any kind of like data repository that they're starting around threat intel?
Is it more like personal? Is that I feel like from what we talked about, it seems like the way you store data and the way you access it and make sure it's readily available, centralized, it's kind of like there's like a personal flair to it. Does that make sense? It's my interpretation. Anyway.
Well, let's say if you have to share your data or intelligence with someone, I would imagine if there's a common template or structure, it'd be easier for other people to understand.
Yeah. So that in that case, it really depends on what other people and what other people on your team are using. So having a data structure depends on the purpose. So you have to have a purpose. We talk about have set a purpose and a goal for data collection, and you also have to structure your data accordingly. Like sticks and taxi, that's how everybody shares intel with, especially if you're dealing with ISACs, then you have to structure your data accordingly.
So I guess just to clarify, are you ever doing like actual analysis in Excel, or are you just using it to present data to teams?
Well, for me personally, Excel is more like a database or data storage.
Right.
When you're doing actual analysis, that will usually move on to the different things, because especially when we're dealing with cyber campaign, or if we are investigating threat actors, link analysis and visualization will be very, very, very important. And so in that case, you would need to use different tools like Multigo, i2, or what other things you're using.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, when it comes to reporting, you have to write in Word.
There is a follow-up question from Kevin. For someone looking to get into threat intelligence, does it help if you have prior experience in a SOC or a red team?
Definitely. That definitely helps a lot. Because threat intelligence, in reality, it's very hard to get into the threat intelligence field as your first job in security, since it does require understanding of some other field, whether it's technical, whether it's actual cybersecurity, or the traditional intel analysis. If you don't have that kind of experience and knowledge, it is going to be very, very hard to get into threat intel. So having experience in security would definitely help, and it's highly recommended.
See, I mentioned the other area that I know of that lots of people go into first is security research, and then they move to threat intel.
Yes.
Right. So tons and tons of organizations in that area. And you start out by doing malware analysis. There is a question for us, actually, team, for the OWASP Toronto group. Is there a communication tool the community uses to connect, like a Discord or something?
I think we have our Slack, right?
Yeah.
It does need some love, but I think a Discord also would not be the worst thing ever.
We do, like OWASP in general, like the global OWASP Foundation has a OWASP Slack. Whether like do we hang out on it very specifically, like the team? One of us is usually like monitoring at a low key, but that with the global community across like all the projects and all the other things are definitely quite active. So let me find the link to that. Do you guys want to keep asking questions? The audience seems to be still thinking for a moment.
How are you doing today? How's your day? You have a good day today? Yeah, that's good. That's good. We like that.
Yeah.
Cool. What do you think is like the biggest challenge for someone getting into this? Because like I know you mentioned like earlier when it comes to like getting into it, you go for people with specific backgrounds, like with military or government backgrounds. I think a lot of times those programs go from like university directly into that, and then having like red team and like soccer fans, like that's a lot of experience. So like if you had to pick one person or like one avenue, there's something going on in the back over there. You know what I'm saying? But someone should help that guy. But beyond that, what's like a good path? Like if I'm in my position now as like an AppSec engineer, how do I go from where I am now to Intel? Like what's that path look like? Instead of do I go directly to government? Do I do it's kind of broad, I guess, but just looking for insight.
Okay, joining the government, or if you want to enlist in the military, they are fun to do, but not necessary.
Okay, I was curious. I figured it seemed like that was like the only option. So good to know.
I would say the only advantage the government or military have is that you get to, because you work in a classified environment, so you get to see and play with a lot of super cool capability, like Matrix style stuff. But you do have to balance that out with, government bureaucracy and being forced to move. You have to live in Ottawa in some cases, or if you're in the military, they have to deploy you everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
So, you have to balance that out. But it is the most mature government. So if you are just like, oh my God, I love Intel so much, I have to learn everything there is about Intel, then government or military is the way to go. But for normal people, we have our lives and we like to live in Toronto or some other big cities instead of Ottawa. Trying to get into the security field first would be a good way to go.
Okay, that makes sense. Also, we're not taking a dump on Ottawa. Ottawa's a great place. We have a lot of good OWASP people up there. Okay, just wanted to highlight that. Yeah. Toronto's great though. We like Toronto. Yes.
All right, I've got a question there. So you used to, as we talked about, work for the government, and now you work for yourself. Do you find it much harder to be like an intelligence analyst today because you don't have the same access to the feeds that you'd have with the government?
Yes and no, because when it comes to capability and access, working as a freelancer, that definitely went from 120 to 10% probably. So there is that. But on the other hand, because we are talking about Intel specifically, you are dealing with, because as a freelancer, I'm dealing with a select few clients. That means their requirements are very narrow and very focused. Instead of the big corporation or government, because you will get requirements, single question like, tell me everything about North Korea.
Right. So are you, in what you do today, are you provided like this is the data we've collected, like make sense of it? Like, is that kind of what you do freelance? Okay.
Pretty much, yes.
Damn.
Seems really interesting.
Yeah. And also, as a freelancer, there's a lot of OSINT stuff as well. So, I can also be a collector if it needs to be.
That's fascinating. Do you ever read Bellingcat?
Oh yes, I took their workshop last year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find them to be fascinating.
Definitely fascinating.
That don't know, Bellingcat is like they're like a non-for-profit
citizen journalists.
That's right. Yeah. They're like an independent journalist group that does like OSINT against like Russia, against like I don't know, other crime entities like governments. I think like pedophiles. Like they do it all, and they even have a book about their analysis. It's very interesting. But they also host a training course as well that teaches OSINT.
Damn, that's actually pretty cool. What's the book called? I'm just curious.
We are Bellingcat or something like that.
I've got it.
Here, I'll link the website. It's
yeah.
They have done some really, really cool investigations. So I would recommend visiting their website and read their articles, and also that book they published. Bellingcat, their focus is on geothing. So geolocation and investigating pictures and videos. So that's their primary focus. Therefore, if you're working on cyber threat intel, it may not be as relevant, but they do teach you how to do online searches and show you some different ways to collect information as well. So I would still recommend it as a reference.
Yeah, because in their articles, they typically kind of walk you through, not like from zero to hero, but they do talk about the analysis that they have done and where they've drawn the conclusions that they have. And it's interesting. It's like comparing like the shadow length and geolocation because of the sun. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's all trigonometry. Very interesting stuff. So
yeah.
Have you guys seen? Okay, so I did see this one post someone made about it was like some group of people in a country out east, blah blah blah. The whole shtick. But they posted a photo of themselves in front of in this open field, and through like OSINT, these people online were able to figure out the exact position they were standing on Earth from the position of 3 hills in the background. There's literally 3 mounds of dirt, and they're like, it's right there. It's exactly as here's the latitude, longitude. Like, we know exactly where this person is. That blows my mind. I have no idea how that happens. I guess GeoGuessr in a way is some sort of form of OSINT in a way. So, like, pretty impressive.
Bellingcat is a good example that show people to do intelligence well, you don't need a lot of resources. You don't need a crazy NSA capabilities or a lot of money or a Palantir. Even just, internet connection and your keyboard is enough.
Yeah, I guess so. How about that?
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you know of any other like groups like Bellingcat, Iris? They're the only one that I've heard of that are kind of this like, independent OSINT body. I guess maybe to some equivalent, there's like Citizen Lab, which is the like Toronto.
They have a lot of interesting articles and publications as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're hosted at UFT, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I can't think of anything else aside from that Citizen Lab.
When it comes to OSINT investigations, actually journalists do this quite often. So there are several journalistic organizations that do OSINT investigations and publish their researchers. I can't recall the name of one of those, but
yeah, it's very interesting. I guess we can get to this like after we give everyone a photo dump of everything that we got here in terms of voice and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, do we have any other questions left from anybody at all? Just curious. I don't know.
There was a peripheral question for us about when we're returning to in-person events, and I was just answering that like we're still working with George Brown to see if they will support us again, and then we're also looking for a new like a temporary home or a new home. And Jessica mentioned that she might have space at Okta, so we should message her.
Oh, is that on Okta King? Is that what it is? If it is, I'm by there. So be the easiest commute ever. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that's that'd be super cool if we got something set up for in person at some point in time in the future, near future, hopefully.
Awesome.
Yeah, and if anybody can host us, like we're open to it. So yeah, if your company will have us, we'll definitely work with you to make that happen. So.
And there were a couple of people who were talking about just moving to Toronto and wanting to connect with more security people. So we were just talking about like going to Task, going to Toronto B-Sides, going to Sector, even just like hanging out in the expo hall to meet people.
Yeah.
And then I think that's mostly it. The other comment was like, you make it sound so simple, Iris, internet connection and keyboard. But, sometimes it's slightly more complicated when it gets down to the...
Yeah, but it really is, because the most important thing about intelligence is having a sense of curiosity. You want to find out what's behind this veil and to find out the truth. There are many, many different ways to do that. So just keep on practicing and then play with data, with your access, and keep reading, keep learning. I've been doing this for quite some time, and I still learn not just one, but multiple new things every single day just by going through Twitter.
Good. Twitter's pretty impressive. I would agree.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there like one resource that you would point people to that you like go look at every day?
Twitter. I live on Twitter. I check Twitter like at least once an hour.
Is there any like specific person where you're like, this person or these 2 people are the ones to like follow first to get some interesting data that you can then like explore their network to?
Well, Bellingcat, which we just talked about, they have their Twitter account. I follow them too, and they do publish a lot of interesting information and discussion on their Twitter account. And another researcher that I really like is Kevin Beaumont, Gossy the Dog.
Oh yeah.
So Kevin is extremely knowledgeable. So that goes without saying, but also he has a lot of empathy, compassion, and also passion for the discipline. So it's quite refreshing to see his, sometimes he talks about flight simulation and other stuff, but you can definitely see the way he approaches life and threat intel. It's quite interesting. So, because a lot of time people see threat intel security in general, you just see drama, especially, I think last week that was the summer camp, and everybody's coming out with COVID, and there are so many arguments on the topic on Twitter. It gets really tiresome. So it's good to follow nice people, nice and mature people, and remind yourself, oh yes, this is what threat intel or cybersecurity is about.
Yeah, that's why I ask the question usually, because like I agree with you about Twitter, and that also like Twitter is this morass of like lots of not so nice things too.
Yeah. Weed them out. It takes a lot of time to curate a list on Twitter.
So I guess first follow Iris and then follow all the people she's following.
Yeah, Iris, are you comfortable sharing your handle? Like, you down for people to follow you?
Oh, totally.
Oh, awesome.
Let me see. I am actually very inactive on Twitter. I used it mainly to collect information.
Okay, so don't follow unless you want to have your information collected. I understand. No.
I hear you. Passive Twitter. Me too.
Yeah.
Okay. It is kind of getting to end of day, and it seems like the questions immediately at least have dried up. So did you want to like share anything else with the audience, Iris?
Well, just like my presentation said, really the most important thing is teamwork. Intelligence is teamwork. So you don't really hear about you've heard about rockstar security people, but you've never heard of rockstar intelligence analysts because they don't exist. It's always about teamwork, whether it's within your organization, outside of your organization. But intel is such a broad field. There's just not possible for any single person to be good at everything. You always have to collaborate. There really is no I in intel.
Interestingly enough.
Yeah.
All right.
That's right. What a wholesome way to end, this
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that, because like that's so undervalued in so many places, and I totally like for AppSec it's the same thing. It's like teamwork.
Yes.
Teamwork and empathy. Yeah.
This is true.
Anything else?
I would agree.
Anything else from the team before we wrap up? Because I want to let Iris go and the audience go.
I can talk for days.
Yeah.
Apparently, yes.
That would be awesome. We should have you back to talk about something else.
Yes. Is there any specific topics?
That would be great.
It's
take 3 years, a lot of bureaucratic decisions on the way, a lot of information collecting all over, but we'll get there, right?
Yes.
Yep.
We also do keep looking for speakers. So if anybody in the audience is like, yes, I would love to talk about something that sets me on fire and like lights up my life, we'd love to hear it, as long as it has something to do with InfoSec, hopefully.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like web app related, like OWASP stands for. Anything tangential, we'll take it,
Well, we try to keep it to like application or like software security related, and then we'll pass like a lot of the other stuff that's not as related to task, but we're still like, we try not to think too much inside of a box, because we're good with talking about things that have to do with, that have relevance, of which like threat intel is very relevant.
Absolutely.
Okay. We got a lot of people kind of saying thank you to Iris for a great presentation. I totally agree. Thank you, Iris, for making the time for us.
For giving me the platform.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right. I guess we can close it off. Well, thank you, Iris. Great presentation. We look forward to having you again. And thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to the audience. Don't forget to leave feedback if you have any. The sector code for $100 off for the free Expo Pass is OWASP 2022, as we commented above. Take care, everybody. Be safe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.